Dustin, so good to see you. I want to get back to basics today with a question. Talk in-service rollovers. When does it actually make sense to move your 401k? Once you reach 59 and a half, many workplace retirement plans allow for what's called an in-service rollover, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. Let's start with the basics. What is an in-service rollover?
Aaron, an in-service rollover is just like any other rollover from a 401k or an employer plan, but an in-service rollover is one that is done while you're still working for that employer before you separated from service. And the age 59 and a half is really important in this case because it's not only the age where you can begin making withdrawals from that 401k without tax penalties. It's also the age you can do those in-service withdrawals. It's a qualifying event. And if you haven't done it earlier, I would say that's an age where you really need to get focused on your retirement income plan, having some plan in place to transition from living off of a paycheck to a retirement that's going to be sustainable.
Yeah, and that brings me to my next question. Why would you want to switch from a 401k to an IRA?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. The big ones, you're going to vastly open up your investment options by making that switch. So even good 401k plans, you're limited to the investment options described in that plan document. Once you transition to an IRA, there are virtually no limitations on the investment vehicles you can use. And more importantly, I would say transitioning to an IRA might give you the ability to work with an advisor who could give you some personalized advice that you just can't get inside that 401k plan. And again, it being a critical age, really having that retirement income plan in place as you make that transition, that's even more important than your investment options.
Of course. So before deciding whether an in-service rollover makes sense, you suggest looking at investment options, fees, and how about what you just mentioned, access to advice?
Sure. So, I mean, for example, when we transition to an IRA from a 401k, working with an advisor on an individualized basis, we can talk about things like Roth conversions that may or may not be available within that employer plan, doing those strategically over a number of years. We can talk about positioning that asset along with the client, the rest of the client's portfolio. We can talk about things like using a portion of those assets to add more guaranteed income to the portfolio or guaranteed income to the plan for not just the participant, but for both spouses in many cases. We can talk about, this is really important, we can talk about volatility and positioning that portfolio for this new season of life. The 5 years prior to retirement, the first 5 years of retirement, they call that the retirement red zone. The reason for that is if we suffer a large market decline, a large drawdown in those years, it can be catastrophic for the plan. So that's a time where working with that client on a one-on-one basis, looking at those 401k assets, which oftentimes are the bulk of someone's portfolio and their retirement assets, really protecting those in those critical years before retirement.
That being said, are there any downsides or risks that people don't realize when they roll money out of a 401k while they're still working, especially around taxes, protections, or plan rules?
I would say a big blind spot is something called NUA, or net unrealized appreciation. This applies to people who have employer stock inside that 401k. So you could be at risk if you're doing an in-service rollover or a rollover at retirement of missing out on some significant tax benefits if you have employer stock in that plan, because the rules around NUA sometimes will allow you to pay capital gains rates on the distributions from that employer stock on the portion that represent gains above basis. Now, what I would tell you is whether or not you, and that's instead of paying income tax rates. So much more friendly in most cases. What I would tell you is it's not something that everybody wants to do. Just because you've got employer stock in your plan doesn't mean that you should be implementing this NUA strategy, but it's something you definitely want to evaluate. And I would tell you the rules around this, it's something where the transactions have to be done following certain rules. If you don't follow those rules, you're going to miss out on the tax benefits. And you could land yourself with a healthy, unexpected income tax bill as well if you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
So this is one of those cases where some individualized help can make a big difference. I really suggest you sit down with a qualified advisor to help you through that process.
Absolutely. A lot of moving parts to this. Well, Dustin, if somebody would like to sit down with you, crunch the numbers, and see if an in-service rollover makes sense for them, what's the best way to reach you?
Give us a call or a text at 830-476-2505 or reach out on the web at longlivemymoney.com to book a free chat.
Great. Dustin, thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.